Chapter 4 of The Lion of St. Mark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. The Lion of St. Mark, A Story of Venice in the 14th Century, by G.A. Henty. Chapter 4, Carried Off. It was with a feeling of considerable discomfort and some awe that Francis Hammond followed his conductor to the chamber of the council. It was a large and stately apartment. The decorations were magnificent, and large pictures representing events in the wars of Venice hung round the walls. The ceiling was also superbly painted. The cornices were heavily gilded. Curtains of worked tapestry hung by the windows and fell behind him as he entered the door. At a table of horseshoe shape, 11 councillors, clad in the long scarlet robes, trimmed with ermine, which were the distinguishing dress of Venetian senators, were seated, the Doge himself acting as president. On their heads they wore black velvet caps, flat at the top, and in shape somewhat resembling the flat Scotch bonnet. Signor Polari and his companions were seated in chairs facing the table. When Francis entered, the gondolier was giving evidence as to the attack upon his boat. Several questions were asked him when he had finished, and he was then told to retire. The usher then brought Francis forward. "This is Messer Francisco Hammond," he said. "Tell your story your own way," the Doge said. Francis related the story of the attack on the gondola and the escape of the ladies in his boat. "How came you, a foreigner and a youth, to interfere in a fray of this kind?" one of the councillors asked. "I did not stop to think of my being a stranger or a youth," Francis replied quietly. "I heard the screams of women in distress, and felt naturally bound to render them what aid I could." "Did you know who the ladies were?" "I knew them only by sight. My friend Matteo Giustiniani had pointed them out to me on one occasion as being the daughters of Signor Polani, and connections of his. When their gondola had passed mine a few minutes previously, I recognized their faces by the light of the torches in their boat." "Were the torches burning brightly?" another of the council asked, "because it may be that this attack was not intended against them, but against some others." "The light was bright enough for me to recognize their faces at a glance," Francis said, "and also the yellow and white sashes of their gondoliers." "Did you see any badge or cognizance, either on the gondola or on the persons of the assailants?" "I did not," Francis said. "They certainly wore none. One of the torches in the Polani gondola had been extinguished in the fray, but the other was still burning, and had the gondoliers worn coloured sashes or other distinguishing marks, I should have noticed them." "Should you recognize, were you to see them again, any of the assailants?" "I should not," Francis said. "They were all masked." "You say you struck down the one who appeared to be their leader with an oar as he was about to leap into your boat. How was it the oar was in your hand instead of that of your gondolier?" "I was myself rowing," Francis said. "In London, rowing is an amusement of which boys of all classes are fond, and since I have been out here with my father I have learned to row a gondola, and sometimes, when I am out of an evening, I take an oar as well as my gondolier, enjoying the exercise and the speed at which the boat goes along. I was not rowing when the signora's boat passed me, but upon hearing the screams I stood up and took the second oar, to arrive as quickly as possible at the spot. That was how it was that I had it in my hand when the man was about to leap into the boat." "Then there is nothing at all, so far as you know, to direct your suspicion against anyone as the author of this attack?" "There was nothing," Francis said, "either in the gondola itself or in the attire or persons of those concerned in the fray, which could give me the slightest clue as to their identity." "At any rate, young gentleman," the Doge said, "you appear to have behaved with a promptness, presence of mind, and courage, for it needs courage to interfere in a fray of this sort beyond your years, and in the name of the Republic I thank you for having prevented the commission of a grievous crime. You will please to remain here for the present. It may be that, when the person accused of this crime appears before us, you may be able to recognize his figure." It was with mixed feelings that Francis heard, a minute or two later, the usher announce that Signor Ruggiero Mocenigo was without, awaiting the pleasure of their Excellencies. "Let him enter," the Doge said. The curtains fell back, and Ruggiero Mocenigo entered with a haughty air. He bowed to the council, and stood as if expecting to be questioned. "You are charged, Ruggiero Mocenigo," the Doge said, "with being concerned in an attempt to carry off the daughters of Signor Polani, and of taking part in the killing of 3 servitors of that gentleman." "On what grounds am I accused?" Ruggiero said haughtily. "On the ground that you are a rejected suitor for the elder lady's hand, and that you had uttered threats against her father, who, so far as he knows, has no other enemies." "This seems somewhat scanty ground for an accusation of such gravity," Ruggiero said sneeringly. "If every suitor who grumbles when his offer is refused is to be held responsible for every accident which may take place in the lady's family, methinks that the time of this reverend and illustrious council will be largely occupied." "You will remember," the Doge said sternly, "that your previous conduct gives good ground for suspicion against you. You have already been banished from the state for 2 years for assassination, and such reports as reached us of your conduct in Constantinople during your exile were the reverse of satisfactory. Had it not been so, the prayers of your friends, that your term of banishment might be shortened, would doubtless have produced their effect." "At any rate," Ruggiero said, "I can, with little difficulty, prove that I had no hand in any attempt upon Signor Polani's daughters last night, seeing that I had friends spending the evening with me, and that we indulged in play until 3 o'clock this morning, an hour at which, I should imagine, the Signoras Polani would scarcely be abroad." "At what time did your friends assemble?" "At 9 o'clock," Ruggiero said. "We met by agreement in the piazza somewhat before that hour, and proceeded together on foot to my house." "Who were your companions?" Ruggiero gave the names of 6 young men, all connections of his family, and summonses were immediately sent for them to attend before the council. "In the meantime, Messer Francisco Hammond, you can tell us whether you recognize in the accused one of the assailants last night." "I cannot recognize him, your Excellency," Francis said, "but I can say certainly that he was not the leader of the party whom I struck with my oar. The blow fell on the temple, and assuredly there would be marks of such a blow remaining today." As Francis was speaking, Ruggiero looked at him with a cold, piercing glance, which expressed the reverse of gratitude for the evidence which he was giving in his favour, and something like a chill ran through him as he resumed his seat behind Signor Polani and his friends. There was silence for a quarter of an hour. Occasionally the members of the council spoke in low tones to each other, but no word was spoken aloud until the appearance of the first of the young men who had been summoned. One after another they gave their evidence, and all were unanimous in declaring that they had spent the evening with Ruggiero Mocenigo, and that he did not leave the room, from the moment of his arrival there soon after 9 o'clock, until they left him at 2 in the morning. "You have heard my witnesses," Ruggiero said, when the last had given his testimony, "and I now ask your Excellencies whether it is right that a gentleman of good family should be exposed to a villainous accusation of this kind, on the barest grounds of suspicion." "You have heard the evidence which has been given, Signor Polani," the Doge said. "Do you withdraw your accusation against Signor Mocenigo?" "I acknowledge, your Excellency," Signor Polani said, rising, "that Ruggiero Mocenigo has proved that he took no personal part in the affair, but I will submit to you that this in no way proves that he is not the author of the attempt. He would know that my first suspicion would fall upon him, and would therefore naturally leave the matter to be carried out by others, and would take precautions to enable him to prove, as he has done, that he was not present. I still maintain that the circumstances of the case, his threats to me, and the fact that my daughter will naturally inherit a portion of what wealth I might possess, and that, as I know and can prove, Ruggiero Mocenigo has been lately reduced to borrowing money of the Jews, all point to his being the author of this attempt, which would at once satisfy his anger against me for having declined the honour of his alliance, and repair his damaged fortunes." There were a few words of whispered consultation between the councillors, and the Doge then said: "All present will now retire while the council deliberates. Our decision will be made known to the parties concerned in due time." On leaving the palace, Signor Polani and his friends walked together across the piazza, discussing the turn of events. "He will escape," Polani said. "He has two near relations on the council, and however strong our suspicions may be, there is really no proof against him. I fear that he will go free. I feel as certain as ever that he is the contriver of the attempt, but the precautions he has taken seem to render it impossible to bring the crime home to him. However, it is no use talking about it any more at present. You will, I hope, accompany me home, Signor Francisco, and allow me to present you formally to my daughters. They were too much agitated last night to be able to thank you fully for the service you had rendered them. Matteo, do you come with us." 3 days passed, and no decision of the council had been announced, when, early in the morning, one of the state messengers brought an order that Francis should be in readiness, at 9 o'clock, to accompany him. At that hour a gondola drew up at the steps. It was a covered gondola, with hangings, which prevented anyone from seeing who were within. Francis took his seat by the side of the official, and the gondola started at once. "It looks very much as if I were being taken as a prisoner," Francis said to himself. "However, that can hardly be, for even if Ruggiero convinced the council that he was wholly innocent of this affair, no blame could fall on me, for I neither accused nor identified him. However, it is certainly towards the prisons we are going." The boat indeed was passing the Piazzetta without stopping, and turned down the canal behind to the prisons in rear of the palace. They stopped at the water gate, close to the bridge of Sighs, and Francis and his conductor entered. They proceeded along 2 or 3 passages until they came to a door where an official was standing. A word was spoken, and they passed in. The chamber they entered was bare and vaulted, and contained no furniture whatever, but at one end was a low stone slab, upon which something was lying covered with a cloak. 4 of the members of the council were standing in a group, talking, when Francis entered. Signor Polani, with 2 of his friends, stood apart at one side of the chamber. Ruggiero Mocenigo also, with 2 of his companions, stood on the other side. Francis thought that the demeanour of Ruggiero was somewhat altered from that which he had assumed at the previous investigation, and that he looked sullen and anxious. "We have sent for you, Francisco Hammond, in order that you may, if you can, identify a body which was found last night, floating in the Grand Canal." One of the officials stepped forward and removed the cloak, showing on the stone slab the body of a young man. On the left temple there was an extensive bruise, and the skin was broken. "Do you recognize that body?" "I do not recognize the face," Francis said, "and do not know that I ever saw it before." "The wound upon the temple which you see, is it such as, you would suppose, could be caused by the blow you struck an unknown person, while he was engaged in attacking the gondola of Signor Polani?" "I cannot say whether it is such a wound as would be caused by a blow with an oar," Francis said, "but it is certainly, as nearly as possible, on the spot where I struck the man, just as he was leaping, sword in hand, into my gondola. You stated, at your examination the other day, that it was on the left temple you struck the blow." "I did so. I said at once that Signor Ruggiero Mocenigo would not have been the man who led the assailants, because had he been so, he would assuredly have borne a mark from the blow on the left temple." "Look at the clothes. Do you see anything there which could lead you to identify him with your assailant?" "My assailant was dressed in dark clothes, as this one was. There was but one distinguishing mark that I noticed, and that is wanting here. The light of the torch fell upon the handle of a dagger in his girdle. I saw it but for a moment, but I caught the gleam of gems. It was only a passing impression, but I could swear that he carried a small gold or yellow metal handled dagger, and I believe that it was set with gems. But to this I should not like to swear." "Produce the dagger found upon the dead man," one of the council said to an official. And the officer produced a small dagger with a fine steel blade with gold handle, thickly encrusted with gems. "Is this the dagger?" the senator asked Francis. "I cannot say that it is the dagger," Francis replied, "but it closely resembles it, if it is not the same." "You have no doubt, I suppose, seeing that wound on the temple, the dagger found in the girdle, and the fact that the body has evidently only been a few days in the water, that this is the man whom you struck down in the fray on the canal." "No, signor. I have no doubt whatever that it is the same person." "That will do," the council said. "You can retire, and we thank you, in the name of justice, for the evidence you have given." Francis was led back to the gondola and conveyed to his father's house. An hour later Signor Polani arrived. "The matter is finished," he said. "I cannot say satisfactorily to me, for the punishment is wholly inadequate to the offence. But at any rate he has not got off altogether unpunished. After you left, we passed from the prison into the palace, and then the whole council assembled, as before, in the council chamber. I may tell you that the body which was found was that of a cousin and intimate of Ruggiero Mocenigo. The two have been constantly together since the return of the latter from Constantinople. It was found, by inquiry at the house of the young man's father, that he left home on the evening upon which the attack was committed, saying that he was going to the mainland and might not be expected to return for some days." The council took it for granted, from the wound in his head, and the fact that a leech has testified that the body had probably been in the water about 3 days, that he was the man that was stunned by your blow and drowned in the canal. Ruggiero urged that the discovery in no way affected him, and that his cousin had, no doubt, attempted to carry off my daughter on his own account. There was eventually a division among the council on this point, but Maria was sent for, and on being questioned, testified that the young man had never spoken to her, and that indeed she did not know him even by sight, and the majority thereupon came to the conclusion that he could only have been acting as an instrument of Ruggiero's. We were not in the apartment while the deliberation was going on, but when we returned the president announced that, although there was no absolute proof of Ruggiero's complicity in the affair, yet that, considering his application for my daughter's hand, his threats on my refusal to his request, his previous character, and his intimacy with his cousin, the council had no doubt that the attempt had been made at his instigation, and therefore sentenced him to banishment from Venice and the islands for 3 years. I should be better pleased if they had sent him back to Constantinople or one of the islands of the Levant, Mr. Hammond said. If he is allowed to take up his abode on the mainland, he may be only 2 or 3 miles away, which, in the case of a man of his description, is much too near to be pleasant for those who have incurred his enmity. That is true, Signor Polani agreed, and I myself and my friends are indignant that he should not have been banished to a distance, where he at least would have been powerless for fresh mischief. On the other hand, his friends will doubtless consider that he has been hardly treated. However, as far as my daughters are concerned, I will take good care that he shall have no opportunity of repeating his attempt, for I have ordered them, on no account whatever, to be absent from the palazzo after the shades of evening begin to fall, unless I myself am with them, and I shall increase the number of armed retainers in the house by bringing some of my men on shore from a ship which arrived last night in port. I cannot believe that even Ruggiero would have the insolence to attempt to carry them off from the house by force, but when one has to deal with a man like this, one cannot take too great precautions. I have already ordered my son on no account to be out after nightfall in the streets. In his gondola I do not mind, for unless the gondoliers wear badges, it is impossible to tell one boat from another after dark. Besides, as he tells me, his boat is so fast that he has no fear whatever of being overtaken, even if recognized and chased. But I shall not feel comfortable so long as he is here, and shall send him back to England on the very first occasion that offers." "I trust that no such occasion may occur just yet, Signor Hammond. I should be sorry, indeed, for your son to be separated so soon from us. We must talk the matter over together, and perhaps between us we may hit on some plan by which, while he may be out of the reach of the peril he has incurred on behalf of my family, he may yet be neither wasting his time nor altogether separated from us." For the next fortnight Francis spent most of his time at the Palazzo Polani. The merchant was evidently sincere in his invitation to him to make his house his home, and if a day passed without the lad paying a visit, would chide him gently for deserting them. He himself was frequently present in the balcony, where the four young people, for Matteo Giustiniani was generally of the party, sat and chatted together, the gouvernante sitting austerely by, with at times a strong expression of disapproval on her countenance at their laughter and merriment, although, as her charge's father approved of the intimacy of the girls with their young cousin and this English lad, she could offer no open objections. In the afternoon the party generally went for a long row in a 4-oared gondola, always returning home upon the approach of evening. To Francis this time was delightful. He had had no sister of his own, and although he had made the acquaintance of a number of lads in Venice, and had accompanied his father to formal entertainments at the houses of his friends, he had never before been intimate in any of their families. The gaiety and high spirits of the two girls, when they were in the house, amused and pleased him, especially as it was in contrast to the somewhat stiff and dignified demeanour which they assumed when passing through the frequented canals in the gondola. "I do not like that woman Castaldi," Francis said one evening as, after leaving the palazzo, Giuseppe rowed them towards the Palazzo Giustiniani, where Matteo was to be landed. "Gouvernantes are not popular as a class with young men," Matteo laughed. "But seriously, Matteo, I don't like her, and I am quite sure that, for some reason or other, she does not like me. I have seen her watching me as a cat would watch a mouse she is going to spring on. Perhaps she has not forgiven you, Francisco, for saving her two charges and leaving her to the mercy of their assailants." "I don't know, Matteo. Her conduct appeared to me at the time to be very strange. Of course she might have been paralyzed with fright, but it was certainly curious the way she clung to their dresses, and tried to prevent them from leaving the boat." "You don't really think, Francis, that she wanted them to be captured?" "I don't know whether I should be justified in saying as much as that, Matteo, and I certainly should not say so to anyone else, but I can't help thinking that such was the case. I don't like her face, and I don't like the woman. She strikes me as being deceitful. She certainly did try to prevent my carrying the girls off, and, had not their dresses given way in her hands, she would have done so. Anyhow, it strikes me that Ruggiero must have had some accomplice in the house. How else would he have known of the exact time at which they would be passing along the Grand Canal? For that the gondola was in waiting to dash out and surprise them, there is no doubt. I was asking Signora Giulia the other day how it was that they were so late, for she says that her father never liked their being out after dusk in Venice, though at Corfu he did not care how late they were upon the water. She replied that she did not quite know how it happened. Her sister had said, some time before, that she thought it was time to be going, but the gouvernante, who was generally very particular, had said that there was no occasion to hurry, as their father knew where they were, and would not be uneasy. She thought the woman must have mistaken the time and did not know how late it was. Of course this proves nothing. Still, I own that, putting all the things together, I have my suspicions. It is certainly curious, Francisco, though I can hardly believe it possible that the woman could be treacherous. She has been for some years in the service of the family, and my cousin has every confidence in her." "That may be, Matteo, but Ruggiero may have promised so highly that he may have persuaded her to aid him. He could have afforded to be generous if he had been successful. There is another thing, by the by, Francisco, which did not strike me at the time, but now you speak of it, may be another link in the chain. I was laughing at Maria about their screaming, and saying what a noise the three of them must have made, and she said, 'Oh no, there were only two of us. Julia and I screamed for aid at the top of our voices, but the Signora was as quiet and brave as possible, and did not utter a sound.' That doesn't agree, Matteo, with her being so frightened as to hold the girls tightly, and almost prevent their escape, or with the row she made, sobbing and crying, when she came back. Of course there is not enough to go upon, and I could hardly venture to speak of it to Signor Polani, or to accuse a woman, in whom he has perfect confidence, of such frightful treachery on such vague grounds of suspicion. Still, I do suspect her, and I hope, when I go away from Venice, you will, as far as you can, keep an eye upon her." "I do not know how to do that," Matteo said, laughing, "but I will tell my cousins that we don't like her, and advise them in future not on any account to stay out after dusk, even if she gives them permission to do so. And if I learn anything more to justify our suspicions, I will tell my cousin what you and I think, though it won't be a pleasant thing to do. However, Ruggiero is gone now, and I hope we shan't hear anything more about him." "I hope not, Matteo, but I am sure he is not the man to give up the plan he has once formed easily, any more than he is to forgive an injury. However, here we are at your steps. We will talk the other matter over another time. Anyhow, I am glad I have told you what I thought, for it has been worrying me. Now that I find you don't think my ideas about her are altogether absurd, I will keep my eyes more open than ever in future. I am convinced she is a bad one, and I only hope we may be able to prove it." "You have made me very uncomfortable, Francisco," Matteo said, as he stepped ashore, "but we will talk about it again tomorrow." "We shall meet at your cousin's in the evening. Before that time we had better both think over whether we ought to tell anyone our suspicions, and we can hold a council in the gondola on the way back." Francis did think the matter over that night. He felt that the fact told him by Julia, that the gouvernante had herself been the means of their staying out later than usual on the evening of the attack, added great weight to the vague suspicions he had previously entertained, and he determined to let the matter rest no longer, but that the next day he would speak to Signor Polani, even at the risk of offending him by his suspicions of a person who had been, for some years, in his confidence. Accordingly he went in the morning to the palazzo, but found that Signor Polani was absent, and would not be in until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He did not see the girls, who, he knew, were going out to spend the day with some friends. At 3 o'clock he returned, and found that Polani had just come in. "Why, Francisco," the merchant said, when he entered, "have you forgotten that my daughters will be out all day?" "No, Signor, I have not forgotten that, but I wish to speak to you. I dare say you will laugh at me, but I hope you will not think me meddlesome or impertinent for touching upon a subject which concerns you nearly." "I am sure you will not be meddlesome or impertinent, Francisco," Signor Polani said reassuringly, for he saw that the lad was nervous and anxious. "Tell me what you have to say, and I can promise you beforehand that, Whether I agree with you or not in what you may have to say, I shall be in no way vexed, for I shall know you have said it with the best intentions. What I have to say, sir, concerns the Signora Castaldi, your daughter's gouvernante. I know, sir, that you repose implicit confidence in her, and your judgment, formed after years of intimate knowledge, is hardly likely to be shaken by what I have to tell you. I spoke to Matteo about it, and, as he is somewhat of my opinion, I have decided that it is, at least, my duty to tell you all the circumstances, and you can, then, form your own conclusions." Francis then related the facts known to him. First, that the assailants of the gondola must have had accurate information as to the hour at which they would come along. Secondly, that it was at the gouvernante's suggestion that the return had been delayed much later than usual. Lastly, that when the attack took place, the gouvernante did not raise her voice to cry for assistance, and that she had, at the last moment, so firmly seized their dresses that it was only by tearing the girls from her grasp that he had been enabled to get them into the boat. "There may be nothing in all this," he said when he had concluded, "but at least, sir, I thought that it was right you should know it, and you will believe me that it is only anxiety as to the safety of your daughters that has led me to speak to you." "Of that I am quite sure," Signor Polani said cordially, "and you were perfectly right in speaking to me. I own, however, that I do not for a moment think that the circumstances are more than mere coincidences. Signora Castaldi has been with me for upwards of 10 years. She has instructed and trained my daughters entirely to my satisfaction. I do not say that she is everything that one could wish, but then no one is perfect, and I have every confidence in her fidelity and trustworthiness. I own that the chain you have put together is a strong one, and had she but lately entered my service, and were she a person of whom I knew but little, I should attach great weight to the facts, although taken in themselves they do not amount to much. Doubtless she saw that my daughters were enjoying themselves in the society of my friends, and in her kindness of heart erred, as she certainly did err, in allowing them to stay longer than she should have done. Then, as to her not crying out when attacked, women behave differently in cases of danger. Some scream loudly, others are silent, as if paralyzed by fear. This would seem to have been her case. Doubtless she instinctively grasped the girls for their protection, and in her fright did not even perceive that a boat had come alongside, or know that you were a friend trying to save them. That someone informed their assailants of the whereabouts of my daughters and the time they were coming home is clear, but they might have been seen going to the house, and a swift gondola have been placed on the watch. Had this boat started as soon as they took their seat in the gondola on their return, and hastened, by the narrow canals, to the spot where their accomplices were waiting, they could have warned them in ample time of the approach of the gondola with my daughters. I have, as you may believe, thought the matter deeply over, for it was evident to me that the news of my daughters' coming must have reached their assailants beforehand. I was most unwilling to suspect treachery on the part of any of my household, and came to the conclusion that the warning was given in the way I have suggested. At the same time, Francisco, I thank you deeply for having mentioned to me the suspicions you have formed, and although I think that you are wholly mistaken, I certainly shall not neglect the warning, but shall watch very closely the conduct of my daughter's gouvernante, and shall take every precaution to put it out of her power to play me false, even while I cannot, for a moment, believe she would be so base and treacherous as to attempt to do so. In that case, Signor, I feel certain that my mission has not been unsuccessful, however mistaken I may be, and I trust sincerely that I am wholly wrong. I thank you much for the kind way in which you have heard me express suspicions of a person in your confidence." The gravity with which the merchant had heard Francis's story vanished immediately he left the room, and a smile came over his face. "Boys are boys all the world over," he said to himself, "and though my young friend has almost the stature of a man, as well as the quickness and courage of one, and has plenty of sense in other matters, he has at once the prejudices and the romantic ideas of a boy. Had Signora Castaldi been young and pretty, no idea that she was treacherous would have ever entered his mind. But what young fellow yet ever liked a gouvernante who sits by and works at her tambour frame, with a disapproving expression on her face, while he is laughing and talking with a girl of his own age? I should have felt the same when I was a boy. Still, to picture the poor Signora as a traitress, in the pay of that villain Mocenigo, is too absurd. I had the greatest difficulty in keeping my gravity when he was unfolding his story. But he is an excellent lad, nevertheless, a true, honest, brave lad, with a little of the bluffness that they say all his nation possess, but with a heart of gold, unless I am greatly mistaken. At 7 o'clock Francis was just getting into his gondola to go round again to Signor Polani's, when another gondola came along the canal at the top of its speed, and he recognized at once the badge of the Giustiniani. It stopped suddenly as it came abreast of his own boat, and Matteo, in a state of the highest excitement, jumped from his own boat into that of Francis. "What is the matter, Matteo? What has happened?" "I have terrible news, Francisco. My cousins have both disappeared." "Disappeared?" Francis repeated, in astonishment. "How have they disappeared?" "Their father has just been round to see mine. He is half mad with grief and anger. You know they had gone to spend the day at the Persani's." "Yes, yes," Francis exclaimed. "But do go on, Matteo. Tell me all about it, quickly." "Well, it seems that Polani, for some reason or other, thought he would go and fetch them himself, and at 5 o'clock he arrived there in his gondola, only to find that they had left 2 hours before. You were right, Francisco. It was that beldam Castaldi. She went with them there in the morning and left them there, and was to have come in the gondola for them at 6. At 3 o'clock she arrived, saying that their father had met with a serious accident, having fallen down the steps of one of the bridges and broken his leg, and that he had sent her to fetch them at once. Of course they left with her instantly. Polani questioned the lackeys who had aided them to embark. They said that the gondola was not one of his boats, but was apparently a hired gondola, with a closed cabin. The girls had stopped in surprise when they came down the steps, and Maria said, "Why, this is not our gondola." Castaldi replied, "No, no, our own gondolas have both gone off to find and bring a leech, and as your father was urgently wanting you, I hailed the first passing boat. Make haste, dears. Your father is longing for you." So they got on board at once, and the gondola rowed swiftly away. That is all I know about it, except that the story was a lie, that their father never sent for them, and that up to a quarter of an hour ago they had not reached home. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of The Lion of St. Mark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Isha. The Lion of St. Mark, A Story of Venice in the 14th Century by G.A. Henty. Chapter 5. Finding a Clue. "This is awful, Matteo," Francis said, when his friend had finished his story. "What is to be done?" "That is just the thing, Francisco. What is to be done? My cousin has already been to the city magistrates, to tell them what has taken place, and to request their aid in discovering where the girls have been carried to. I believe that he is going to put up a proclamation, announcing that he will give 1,000 ducats to whomsoever will bring information which will enable him to recover the girls. That will set every gondolier on the canals on the alert, and some of them must surely have noticed a closed gondola rowed by 2 men, for at this time of year very few gondolas have their covers on. It seems to be terrible not to be able to do anything, so I came straight off to tell you. You had better send your gondola home, Matteo. It may be wanted. We will paddle out to the lagoon and talk it over. Surely there must be something to be done, if we could but think of it." "This is terrible indeed, Matteo," he repeated, after they had sat without speaking for some minutes. "One feels quite helpless and bewildered. To think that only yesterday evening we were laughing and chatting with them, and that now they are lost and in the power of that villain Mocenigo, who you may be sure is at the bottom of it. By the way," he said suddenly, "do you know where he has taken up his abode? I heard that he was at Botonda, near Chioggia, a week ago, but whether he is there still I have not the least idea. It seems to me that the thing to do is to find him and keep him in sight. He will probably have them hidden away somewhere, and will not go near them for some time, for he will know that he will be suspected and perhaps watched." "But why should he not force Maria to marry him at once?" Matteo said. "You see, when he has once made her his wife, he will be safe, for my cousin would be driven then to make terms with him for her sake." "He may try that," Francis said, "but he must know that Maria has plenty of spirit, and may refuse to marry him, threaten her as he will. He may think that, after she has been kept confined for some time, and finds that there is no hope of escape, except by consenting to be his wife, that she may give way. But in any case, it seems to me that the thing to be done is to find Ruggiero and to watch his movements." "I have no doubt my cousin has already taken steps in that direction," Matteo said, "and I feel sure that, in this case, he will receive the support of every influential man in Venice, outside the Mocenigo family and their connections. The carrying off of ladies in broad daylight will be regarded as a personal injury in every family. The last attempt was different. I do not say it was not bad enough, but it is not like decoying girls from home by a false message. No one could feel safe if such a deed as this were not severely punished. Let us go back again, Matteo. It is no use our thinking of anything until we know what has really been done, and you are sure to be able to learn at home what steps have been taken." On reaching home, Matteo learned that Polani, accompanied by 2 members of the council, had already started in one of the swiftest of the state galleys for the mainland. A council had been hastily summoned, and upon hearing Polani's narrative had dispatched 2 of their number, with an official of the Republic, to Botonda. If Ruggiero was found to be still there, he was to be kept a prisoner in the house in which he was staying under the strictest watch. If he had left, orders were to be sent to every town in the Venetian dominions on the mainland for his arrest when discovered, and in that case he was to be sent a prisoner, strongly guarded, to Venice. Other galleys had been simultaneously dispatched to the various ports, ordering a strict search of every boat arriving or leaving, and directing a minute investigation to be made as to the occupants of every boat that had arrived during the evening or night. The fact that 1,000 ducats were offered for information which would lead to the recovery of the girls was to be published far and wide. The news of the abduction had spread, and the greatest indignation was excited in the city. The sailors from the port of Malamocco came over in great numbers. They regarded this outrage on the family of the great merchant as almost a personal insult. Stones were thrown at the windows of the Palazzo Mocenigo, and an attack would have been made upon it had not the authorities sent down strong guards to protect it. Persons belonging to that house, and the families connected with it, were assaulted in the streets, and all Venice was in an uproar. "There is one comfort," Giuseppe said, when he heard from Francis what had taken place. "Just at present Mocenigo will have enough to think about his own affairs without troubling about you. I have been in a tremble ever since that day, and have dreamed bad dreams every night." "You are more nervous for me than I am for myself, Giuseppe. But I have been careful too, for although Ruggiero himself was away, his friends are here, and active too, as you see by this successful attempt. But I think that at present they are likely to let matters sleep. Public opinion is greatly excited over the affair, and as, if I were found with a stab in my back, it would, after what has passed, be put down to them, I think they will leave me alone." "I do hope, father," Francis said at breakfast the next morning, "that there may be no opportunity of sending me back to England until something is heard of the Polanis." "I have somewhat changed my mind, Francis, as to the matter. After what Signor Polani said the other day, I feel that it would be foolish for me to adhere to that plan. With his immense trade and business connections, he can do almost anything for you, and such an introduction into business is so vastly better than your entering my shop in the city, that it is best, in every way, that you should stay here for the present. Of course, for the time he will be able to think of nothing but his missing daughters, but at any rate you can remain here until he has leisure to pursue the subject, and to state, further than he did the other day, what he proposes for you. My own business is a good one for a London trader, but it is nothing by the side of the transactions of the merchant princes at Venice, among the very first of whom Signor Polani is reckoned." Francis was greatly pleased at his father's words. He had, ever since Polani had spoken to him, been pondering the matter in his mind. He knew that to enter business under his protection would be one of the best openings that even Venice could afford. But his father was slow to change his plans, and Francis greatly feared that he would adhere to his original plan. "I was hoping, father, that you would think favourably of what Signor Polani said, although of course I kept silence, knowing that you would do what was best for me. And now I would ask, if you will, until this matter is cleared up, excuse me from my tasks. I should learn nothing did I continue at them, for my mind would be ever running upon Signor Polani's daughters, and I should be altogether too restless to apply myself. It seems to me, too, that I might, as I row here and there in my gondola, obtain some clue as to their place of concealment." "Do not see how you could do that, Francis, when so many others, far better qualified than yourself, will be on the lookout. Still, as I agree with you that you are not likely to apply your mind diligently to your tasks, and as indeed you will shortly be giving them up altogether, I grant your request." Polani returned in the evening to Venice. Ruggiero Mocenigo had been found. He professed great indignation at the accusation brought against him of being concerned in the abduction of the ladies, and protested furiously when he heard that, until they were found, he was to consider himself a prisoner. Signor Polani considered that his indignation was feigned, but he had no doubt as to the reality of his anger at finding that he was to be confined to his house under a guard. Immediately after his return, Polani sent his gondola for Francis. He was pacing up and down the room when the lad arrived. "Your suspicions have turned out correct, as you see, Francis. Would to heaven I had acted upon them at once, and then this would not have happened. It seemed to me altogether absurd when you spoke to me that the woman I have for years treated as a friend should thus betray me, and yet your warning made me uneasy. So much so that I set off myself to fetch them home at 5 o'clock, only to find that I was too late. I scarcely know why I have sent for you, Francis, except that, as I have found, to my cost, that you were more clear-sighted in this matter than I want to know what you think now, and whether any plan offering even a chance of success has occurred to you. That they have been carried off by the friends of Mocenigo I have no doubt whatever." "I fear, Signor," Francis said, "that there is little hope of my thinking of anything that has not already occurred to you. It seems to me hardly likely that they can be in the city, although of course they may be confined in the house of Mocenigo's agents. Still, they would be sure that you would offer large rewards for their discovery, and would be more likely to take them right away. Besides, I should think that it was Mocenigo's intention to join them, wherever they may be, as soon as he learned that they were in the hands of his accomplices. Your fortunate discovery that they had gone so soon after they had been carried off, and your going straight to him armed with the order of the council, probably upset his calculations. For it is likely enough that his agents had not arrived at the house, and that he learned from you, for the first time, that his plans had succeeded. Had you arrived 2 or 3 hours later, you might have found him gone." "That is what I calculated, Francisco. His agents had but 4 hours' start of me. They would, no doubt, carry the girls to the place of concealment chosen, and would then bear the news to him, whereas I, going direct in one of the state gondolas, might reach him before they did, and I feel assured that I did so. It was nigh midnight when I arrived, but he was still up, and I doubt not awaiting the arrival of the villains he had employed. My first step was to set a watch round the house, with the order to arrest any who might come and inquire for him. No one, however, came. The news, indeed, of the sudden arrival of a state galley at that hour had caused some excitement in the place, and his agents might well have heard of it upon their arrival. I agree with you in thinking they are not in the town, but this makes the search all the more difficult. The question is, what ought we to do next? The reward that you have offered will certainly bring you news, Senor, if any, save those absolutely concerned, have observed anything suspicious. But I should send to all the fishing villages, on the islets and on the mainland, to publish the news of the reward you have offered. Beyond that, I do not see that anything can be done, and I too have thought of nothing else since Matteo brought me the news of their being carried off. It will be of no use, that I can see, going among the fishermen and questioning them, because, with such a reward in view, it is certain that anyone who has anything to tell will come, of his own accord, to do so. I know that is the case already, Francisco. The authorities have been busy all day with the matter, and a score of reports as to closed gondolas being seen have reached them. But so far nothing has come of it. Many of these gondolas have been traced to their destinations, but in no case was there anything to justify suspicion. Happily, as long as Mocenigo is in confinement, I feel that no actual harm will happen to the girls. But the villain is as crafty as a fox, and may elude the vigilance of the officer in charge of him. I am going to the council presently, to urge that he should be brought here as a prisoner. But from what I hear, there is little chance of the request being complied to. His friends are already declaiming on the injustice of a man being treated as a criminal when there is no shadow of proof forthcoming against him, and the disturbances last night have angered many who have no great friendship for him, but who are indignant at the attack of the populace upon the house of a noble. So you see that there is but faint chance that they bring him hither as a prisoner. I think, sir, that were I in your case, I should put some trusty men to watch round the house where he is being confined, so that in case he should escape the vigilance of his guards, they might seize upon him. Everything depends, as you say, upon his being kept in durance. I will do so, Francisco, at once. I will send to 2 of my officers at the port, and tell them to pick out a dozen men on whom they can rely to proceed to Portonda, to watch closely everyone who enters or leaves the house, without at the same time making themselves conspicuous. At any rate, they will be handy there in case Mocenigo's friends attempt to rescue him by force, which might be done with success, for the house he occupies stands at a short distance out of the town, and the official in charge of Mocenigo has only 8 men with him. Yes, your advice is excellent, and I will follow it at once. Should any other idea occur to you, pray let me know it immediately. You saved my daughters once, and although I know there is no reason why it should be so, still, I feel a sort of belief that you may, somehow, be instrumental in their again being brought back to me." "I will do my best, sir, you may depend upon it," Francis said earnestly. "Were they my own sisters, I could not feel more strongly interested in their behalf." Francis spent the next week almost entirely in his gondola. Starting soon after daybreak with Giuseppe, he would row across to the villages on the mainland and make inquiries of all sorts there, would visit the little groups of fishermen's huts built here and there on posts among the shallows. He would scan every house as he passed it, with the vague hope that a face might appear at the window or a hand be waved for assistance. But during all that time he found nothing which seemed to offer the slightest clue, nor were the inquiries set on foot by Signor Polani more successful. Every piece of information which seemed to bear in the slightest degree upon the affair was investigated, but in no case was it found of the slightest utility. One evening he was returning late, tired by the long day's work, and discouraged with his utter want of success, when, just as he had passed under the Ponto Maggiore, the lights on the bridge fell on the faces of the sitters in a gondola coming the other way. They were a man and a woman. The latter was closely veiled, but the night was close and oppressive, and just at the moment when Francis's eyes fell upon her, she lifted her veil for air. Francis recognized her instantly. For a moment he stopped rowing, and then dipped his oar in as before. Directly the other gondola passed through the bridge behind him, and his own had got beyond the circle of light, he swept it suddenly round. Giuseppe gave an exclamation of surprise. "Giuseppe, We have luck at last. Did you notice that gondola we met just now? The woman sitting in it is Castaldi, the woman who betrayed the signoras." "What shall we do, Messer Francisco?" Giuseppe, who had become almost as interested in the search as his master, asked. "There was only a single gondolier and one other man. If we take them by surprise, we can master them." "That will not do, Giuseppe. The woman would refuse to speak, and though they would force her to do so in the dungeons, the girls would be sure to be removed the moment it was known she was captured. We must follow them, and see where they go to. Let us get well behind them, so that we can just make them out in the distance. If they have a suspicion that they are being followed, they will land her at the first steps and slip away from us." "They are landing now, signor," Giuseppe exclaimed directly afterwards. "Shall we push on and overtake them on shore?" "It is too late, Giuseppe. They are 150 yards away, and would have mixed in the crowd and be lost long before we should get ashore and follow them. Row on fast, but not over towards that side. If the gondola moves off, we will make straight for the steps and try to follow them, though our chance of hitting upon them in the narrow lanes and turnings is slight indeed. But if, as I hope, the gondola stops at the steps, most likely they will return to it in time, so we will row in to the bank 100 yards further up the canal and wait." The persons who had been seen in the gondola had disappeared when they came abreast of it, and the gondolier had seated himself in the boat with the evident intention of waiting. Francis steered his gondola at a distance of a few yards from it as he shot past, but did not abate his speed, and continued to row till they were 300 or 400 yards farther up the canal. Then he turned the gondola and paddled noiselessly back until he could see the outline of the boat he was watching. An hour elapsed before any movement was visible. Then Francis heard the sound of footsteps, and could just make out the figures of persons descending the steps and entering the gondola. Then the boat moved out into the middle of the canal, where a few boats were still passing to and fro. Francis kept his gondola close by the bank, so as to be in the deep shade of the houses. The boat they were following again passed under the Ponto Maggiore, and for some distance followed the line of the Grand Canal. "Keep your eye upon it, Giuseppe. It is sure to turn off one way or the other soon. If it is too far ahead of us when it does so, then it may give us a slip altogether." But the gondola continued its course the whole length of the canal, and then straight on until, nearly opposite St. Mark's, it passed close to a larger gondola, with 4 rowers coming slowly in the other direction, and it seemed to Francis that the 2 boats paused when opposite each other, and that a few words were exchanged. Then the boat they were watching turned out straight into the lagoon. It was rather lighter here than in the canal, bordered on each side by houses, and Francis did not turn the head of his gondola for a minute or two. "It will be very difficult to keep them in sight out here without their making us out," Giuseppe said. "Yes, and it is likely enough that they are only going out there in order that they may be quite sure that they are not followed before striking off to the place they want to go to. They may possibly have made us out, and guess that we are tracking them. They would be sure to keep their eyes and ears open. I can only just make them out now, Messer Francisco, and we shall have the buildings behind us. They will not be able to see us as well as we can see them. I think we can go now." "We will risk it at any rate, Giuseppe. I've lost sight of them already, and it will never do to let them give us the slip." They dipped their oars in the water, and the gondola darted out from the shore. They had not gone 50 strokes when they heard the sound of oars close at hand. "To the right, Giuseppe, hard!" Francis cried, as he glanced over his shoulder. A sweep with both oars brought the gondola's head, in a moment, almost at right angles to the course that she had been pursuing, and the next sent her dancing on a new line, just as the 4-oared gondola swept down upon them, missing their stern by only 3 or 4 feet. Had they been less quick in turning, the iron prow would have cut right through their light boat. Giuseppe burst into a torrent of vituperation at the carelessness of the gondoliers who had so nearly run into them, but Francis silenced him at once. "Row, Giuseppe, it was done on purpose. It is the gondola the other spoke to." Their assailant was turning also, and in a few seconds was in pursuit. Francis understood it now. The gondola they had been following had noticed them, and had informed their friends waiting off St. Mark's of the fact. Intent upon watching the receding boat, he had paid no further attention to the four-oared craft, which had made a turn and lay waiting in readiness to run them down should they follow in the track of the other boat. Francis soon saw that the craft behind them was a fast one, and rowed by men who were first-rate gondoliers. Fast as his own boat was flying through the water, the other gained upon them steadily. He was heading now for the entrance to the Grand Canal, for their pursuer, in the wider sweep he had made in turning, was nearer to the piazza than they were, and cut off their flight in that direction. "Keep cool, Giuseppe," he said. "They will be up to us in a minute or two. When their bow is within a yard or two of us, and I say 'now,' sweep her head straight round towards the lagoon. We can turn quicker than they can. Then let them gain upon us, and we will then turn again." The gondola in pursuit came up, hand over hand. Francis kept looking over his shoulder, and when he saw its bow gliding up within a few feet of her stern, he exclaimed, "Now!" and with a sudden turn the gondola again swept out seaward. Their pursuer rushed on for a length or two before she could sweep round, while a volley of imprecations and threats burst from three men who were standing up in her with drawn swords. Francis and Giuseppe were now rowing less strongly and gaining breath for their next effort. When the gondola again came up to them, they swept round to the left, and as their pursuers followed, they headed for the Grand Canal. "Make for the steps of Santa Maria Church. We will jump out there and trust to our feet." The two lads put out all their strength now. They were some 3 boats' lengths ahead before their pursuers were fairly on their track. They were now rowing for life, for they knew that they could hardly succeed in doubling again, and that the gondola behind them was so well handled that they could not gain on it at the turnings were they to venture into the narrow channels. It was a question of speed alone, and so hard did they row that the gondola in pursuit gained but slowly on them, and they were still 2 lengths ahead when they dashed up to the steps of the church. Simultaneously they both sprang on shore, leapt up the steps, and dashed off at the top of their speed, hearing, as they did so, a crash as the gondola ran into their light craft. There was a moment's delay, as the men had to step across their boat to gain the shore, and they were 50 yards ahead before they heard the sound of their pursuers' feet on the stone steps. But they were lightly clad and shoeless, and carried nothing to impede their movements, and they had therefore little fear of being overtaken. After racing on at the top of their speed for a few minutes, they stopped and listened. The sound of their pursuers' footsteps died away in the distance, and after taking a few turns to put them off their track, they pursued their way at a more leisurely pace. "They have smashed the gondola," Giuseppe said with a sob, for he was very proud of the light craft. "Never mind the gondola," Francis said cheerfully. "If they had smashed 100, it would not matter." "But the woman has got away, and we have learned nothing," Giuseppe said, surprised at his master's cheerfulness. "I think we have learned something, Giuseppe. I think we have learned everything. I have no doubt the girls are confined in that hut on San Nicolo. I wonder I never thought of it before, but I made so sure that they would be taken somewhere up close to where Mocenigo was staying, that it never occurred to me that they might hide them out there. I ought to have known that that was just the thing they would do, for while the search would be keen among the islets near the land and the villages there, no one would think of looking for them on the seaward islands. I have no doubt that they are there now. That woman came ashore to report to his friends, and that 4-oared boat which has chased us was in waiting off St. Mark's to attack any boat that might be following them. We will go to Signor Polani at once and tell him what has happened. I suppose it is about 1 o'clock now, but I have not noticed the hour. It was past 11 before we first met the gondola, and we must have been a good deal more than an hour lying there waiting for them." A quarter of an hour's walking took them to the palazzo of Polani. They rang twice at the bell at the land entrance, before a face appeared at the little window of the door and asked who was there. "I wish to see Signor Polani at once," Francis said. "The Signor retired to rest an hour ago," the man said. "Never mind that," Francis replied. "I am Francis Hammond, and I have important news to give him." As soon as the servitor recognized Francis's voice, he unbarred the door. "Have you news of the ladies?" he asked eagerly. "I have news which will, I hope, lead to something," Francis replied. A moment later, the voice of Polani himself, who, although he had retired to his room, had not yet gone to sleep, was heard at the top of the grand stairs, inquiring who it was who had come so late. For although men had been arriving all day with reports from the various islands and villages, he thought that no one would come at this hour unless his news were important. Francis at once answered, "It is I, Signor Polani, Francis Hammond. I have news which I think may be of importance, although I may be mistaken. Still, it is certainly news that may lead to something." The merchant hurried down. "What is it, Francisco? What have you learned?" "I have seen the woman Castaldi, and have followed her. I do not know for certain where she was going, for we have been chased by a large gondola and have narrowly escaped with our lives. Still, I have a clue to their whereabouts." Francis then related the events of the evening. "But why did you not run into the boat and give the alarm at once, Francisco? Any gondolas passing would have given their assistance, when you declared who she was, for the affair is the talk of the city. If that woman were in our power, we should soon find means to make her speak." "Yes, signor, but the moment she was known to be in your power, you may be sure that they would remove your daughters from the place where they have been hiding them. I thought, therefore, the best plan would be to track them. No doubt we should have succeeded in doing so, had it not been for the attack upon us by another gondola." "You are right, no doubt, Francisco. Still, it is unfortunate, for I do not see that we are now any nearer than we were before, except that we know that this woman is in the habit of coming into the city." "I think we are nearer, sir, for I had an adventure some time ago that may afford a clue to their hiding place." He then told the merchant how he had, one evening, taken a man out to San Nicolo, and had discovered that a hut in that island was used as a meeting place by various persons, among whom was Ruggiero Mocenigo. "I might have thought of the place before, signor, but in fact it never entered my mind. From the first we considered it so certain that the men who carried off your daughters would take them to some hiding place where Mocenigo could speedily join them, that San Nicolo never entered my mind. I own that it was very stupid, for it seems now to me that the natural thing for them to do would be to take them in the very opposite direction to that in which the search for them would be made." The story had been frequently interrupted by exclamations of surprise by Polani. At its conclusion he laid his hand on Francis's shoulder. "My dear boy," he said, "how can I thank you? You seem to me to be born to be the preserver of my daughters. I cannot doubt that your suspicion is correct, and that they are confined in this hut at San Nicolo. How fortunate that you did not denounce this conspiracy, for conspiracy no doubt it is, that you discovered, for, had you done so, some other place would have been selected for the girls' prison." "I would not be too sanguine, sir. The girls may not be in this hut. Still, we may come on some clue there which may lead us to them. If not, we will search the islands on that side as closely as we have done those on the mainland. Now, shall I send for the gondoliers and set out at once? There are 10 or 12 men in the house, and it is hardly likely that they will place a guard over them of anything like this strength, as of course they will be anxious to avoid observation by the islanders." "I do not think I would do anything tonight, sir," Francis said. "The gondola that chased us will be on the alert. They cannot, of course, suspect in the slightest that we have any clue to the hiding place of your daughters. Still, they might think that, if we were really pursuing the other gondola and had recognized the woman Castaldi, we might bring the news to you, and that a stir might be made. They may therefore be watching to see if anything comes of it, and if they saw a bustle and gondolas setting out taking the direction of the island, they might set off and get there first, for it is a very fast craft, and remove your daughters before we reach the hut. I should say, wait till morning. They may be watching your house now, and if, in an hour or two, they see all is quiet, they will no doubt retire with the belief that all danger is at an end. Then in the morning I would embark the men in 2 or 3 gondolas, but I would not start from your own steps, for no doubt your house is watched. let the men go out singly and embark at a distance from here, and not at the same place. Once out upon the lagoon, they should row quietly towards San Nicolo, keeping a considerable distance apart, the men lying down in the bottom as the boats approach the island, so that if anyone is on watch he will have no suspicion. As I am the only one that knows the position of the hut, I will be with you in the first gondola. We will not land near the hut, but pass by and land at the other end of the island. The other gondolas will slowly follow us and land at the same spot. Then 3 or 4 men can go along by the sea face with orders to watch any boats hauled up upon the shore there, and stop any party making down towards them. The rest of us will walk straight to the hut, and as it lies among sand hills, I hope we shall be able to get quite close to it before our approach is discovered." "An excellent plan, Francisco, though I am so impatient that the night will seem endless to me. But certainly your plan is the best. Even if the house is watched and you were seen to enter, if all remains perfectly quiet, they will naturally suppose that the news you brought was not considered of sufficient importance to lead to any action. You will, of course, remain here till morning?" "I cannot do that, sir, though I will return the first thing. There is lying on my table a paper with the particulars and names of the persons I saw meet in this hut, and a request to my father that, if I do not return in the morning, he will at once lay this before the council. I place it there every day when I go out, in order that, if I should be seized and carried off by Montenegro's people, I should have some means of forcing them to let me go. Although I know absolutely nothing of the nature of the conspiracy, they will not know how much I am aware of, or what particulars I may have given in the document. And as I could name to them those present, and among them is the envoy of the King of Hungary, now in the city, they would hardly dare harm me, when they knew that, if they did so, this affair would be brought before the council." "It was an excellent precaution, Francisco. Why, you are as prudent and thoughtful as you are courageous." "It was not likely to be of much use, sir," Francis said modestly. "I was very much more likely to get a stab in the back than to be carried off. Still, it was just possible that Montenegro might himself like to see his vengeance carried out, and it was therefore worth my while guarding against it. But as you see, it will be necessary for me to be back some time before morning." "At any rate, Francisco, you had better wait here until morning breaks. Your room is not likely to be entered for some hours after that. So while I am preparing for our expedition, you can go out and make your way to the Grand Canal, hail an early gondola, and be put down at your own steps, when, as you have told me, you can enter the house without disturbing anyone. Then you can remove that paper and return here in the gondola. We will start at 7. There will be plenty of boats about by that time, and the lagoon will be dotted by the fishermen's craft, so that our gondolas will attract no attention." "Perhaps that will be the best plan, signor. And indeed I should not be sorry for a few hours' sleep, for Giuseppe and I have been in our boat since a very early hour in the morning. We're pretty well tired out before this last adventure began." End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of the Lion of St. Mark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Isha. The Lion of St. Mark. A Story of Venice in the 14th Century by G. A. Henty. Chapter 6. The Hut on San Nicolo. At 7 o'clock, all was in readiness for the start. Signor Polani set out alone in his gondola, and picked up Francis and 4 men at a secluded spot some distance from the house. A messenger had been sent 2 hours before to the captain of one of the merchant ships lying in the port. He had at once put 10 men into a large boat, and rowed down to within half a mile of the island. Here a grapnel was thrown overboard. Most of the men lay down the bottom, and the captain, according to his instructions, kept a sharp lookout to see that no boat left San Nicolo, his instructions being to overhaul any boat coming out, and to see that no one was concealed on board it. There he remained until Polani's gondola rowed past him. After it had gone a few hundred yards, the grapnel was got up. The men took to their oars and followed the gondola, keeping so far behind it that it would not seem there was any connection between them. Francis made for the narrow channel which separated San Nicolo from the next island, and then directed the gondola to be run ashore, where a low sand-hill close by hid them from sight of anyone on the lookout. A few minutes later the ship's boat arrived. Francis now led the way direct for the hut, accompanied by Polani and 6 men, while 4 sailors advanced at a distance of 100 yards on either flank to cut off anyone making for the water. "We may as well go fast," he said. "We can scarcely get there without being seen by a lookout, should there be one on the sandhills, and the distance is so short that there will be no possibility of their carrying your daughters off before we get there." "The faster the better," the merchant said. "This suspense is terrible." Accordingly, the party started at a brisk run. Francis kept his eyes on the spot where he believed the hut lay. "I see no one anywhere near there," he said, as they came over one of the sand ridges. "Had there been anyone on the watch, I think we should see him now." On they ran, until, passing over one of the sandhills, Francis came to a standstill. The hut lay in the hollow below them. "There is the house, signor. Now we shall soon know." They dashed down the short slope and gathered round the door. "Within there! Open!" the merchant shouted, hammering with the hilt of his sword on the door. All was silent within. "Break it down," he said, and 2 of the sailors, who had brought axes with them, began to hew away at the door. A few blows, and it suddenly opened, and 2 men dressed as fishermen appeared in the doorway. "What means this attack upon the house of quiet people?" they demanded. "Bind them securely," Polani said, as he rushed in, followed closely by Francis, while those who followed seized the men. Polani paused as he crossed the threshold with a cry of disappointment. The hut was empty. Francis was almost equally disappointed. "If they are not here, they are near by," Francis said to Polani. "Do not give up hope. I am convinced they are not far off, and if we search we may find a clue. Better keep your men outside. We can search more thoroughly by ourselves." The merchant told his men, who had seized and were binding the 2 occupants of the hut, to remain outside. The inside of the hut differed in no way from the ordinary dwelling of fishermen, except that a large table stood in the middle of it, and there were some benches against the walls. Some oars stood in one corner, and some nets were piled close to them. A fire burned in the open hearth, and a pot hung over it, and 2 others stood on the hearth. "Let us see what they have got here," Francis said, while the merchant leaned against the table with an air of profound depression, paying no attention to what he was doing. "A soup?" Francis said, lifting the lid from the pot over the fire, "and by the smell a good one." Then he lifted the other pots simmering among the burning brands. "A ragout of kid, and a boiled fish. Signor Polani, this is no fisherman's meal. Either these men expect visitors of a much higher degree than themselves, or your daughters are somewhere close. Oh, there is a door." "It can lead nowhere," Polani said. "The sand is piled up to the roof on that side of the house." "It is," Francis agreed, "but there may be a lower room there, completely covered with the sand. At any rate, we will see." He pushed against the door, but it did not give in the slightest. "It may be the sand," he said. "It may be bolts." He went to the outside door and called in the sailors with the hatchets. "Break open that door," he said. "There is a space behind," he exclaimed, as the first blow was given. "It is hollow, I swear. It would be a different sound altogether if sand were piled up against it." A dozen blows and the fastenings gave, and sword in hand the merchant and Francis rushed through. Both gave a shout of delight. They were in a room built out at the back of the hut. It was richly furnished, and the hangings of Eastern stuffs covered the walls. A burning lamp hung from the ceiling. 2 men stood irresolute, with drawn swords, having apparently turned round just as the door gave way, for as it did so 2 figures struggled to their feet from a couch behind them, for some shawls had been wrapped round their heads, and with a cry of delight rushed forward to meet their rescuers. Seated at the end of the couch, with bowed down head, was another female figure. "Maria! Julia!" the merchant exclaimed, as, dropping his sword, he clasped his daughters in his arms. Francis, followed by 2 sailors with hatchets, advanced towards the men. "Drop your swords and surrender," he said. "Resistance is useless. There are a dozen men outside." The men threw their swords down on the ground. "Lead them outside and bind them securely," Francis said. For the next minute or two few words were spoken. The girls sobbed with delight on their father's breast, while he himself was too moved to do more than murmur words of love and thankfulness. Francis went quietly out and spoke to the captain, who went into the inner room, touched the sitting figure on the shoulder, and taking her by the arm, led her outside. "Come in, Francis," Polani called, a minute later. "My dears, it is not me you must thank for your rescue. It is your English friend here, who has again restored you to me. It is to him we owe our happiness, and that you, my child, are saved from the dreadful fate of being forced to be the wife of that villain Mocenigo. Embrace him, my dears, as a brother, for he has done more than a brother for you. And now tell me all that has happened since I last saw you. You know, father, the message that was brought us, that you had been hurt and wanted us home?" "Yes, my dears, that I learned soon afterwards. I went at 5 o'clock to fetch you home, and found that you had gone, and why." "Well, father, directly we had taken our seats in the cabin of the gondola, our gouvernante closed the doors, and soon afterwards she slid to the 2 shutters before the windows. We cried out in surprise at finding ourselves in the dark, but she bade us be quiet, in a tone quite different to any in which she had ever spoken to us before. We were both frightened, and tried to push back the shutters and open the door, but they were fastened firmly. I suppose it was some spring which held them. Then we screamed, but I could feel that the inside was all thickly padded. I suppose our voices could not be heard outside. I thought so, because once I thought I heard the gondoliers singing, but it was so faint that I could not be sure. Then the air seemed stiflingly close, and I fainted. And when I came to myself, one of the windows was open, and Julia said she had promised we would not scream. But I think we were beyond the canals then, for I could see nothing but the sky as we passed along. When I was better, the windows were almost shut again, so that we could not see out, though a little air could get in. Then the gondola went on for a long time. At last it stopped, and she said we must be blindfolded. We said we would not submit to it, and she told us unless we let her do it, the men would do it. So we submitted, and she wrapped shawls closely over our heads. Then we were helped ashore and walked some distance. At last the shawls were taken off our heads, and we found ourselves here, and here we have been ever since." "You have not been ill-treated in any way, my children?" the merchant asked anxiously. "Not at all, father. Until today, nobody has been into this room besides ourselves and that woman. The door was generally left a little open for air, for you see there are no windows here. She used to go into the next room and come back with our food. We could see men moving about in there, but they were very quiet, and all spoke in low tones. You may think how we upbraided our gouvernante for her treachery, and threatened her with your anger. She told us we should never be found, and that I might as well make up my mind to marry Ruggiero Mocenigo, for if I did not consent quietly, means would be found to compel me to do so. I said I would die first. But she used to laugh a cruel laugh, and say he would soon be here with the priest, and that it mattered not whether I said yes or no. The ceremony would be performed, and then Ruggiero would sail away with me to the east, and I should be glad enough then to make peace between him and you. But he never came. I think she became anxious, for she went away twice for 3 or 4 hours, and locked us in here when she went. That, father, is all that we know about it. Where are we?" "You are at San Nicolo." "On the island?" Maria exclaimed in surprise. She told us we were on the mainland. And now, how did you find us?" "I will tell you as we go home, Maria." "Yes, that will be better, father. Julia and I long for a breath of fresh air, and the sight of the blue sky." "Julia has not had so much to frighten her as you have," her father said. "Yes, I have, father, for she said I was to go across the seas with Maria, and that Ruggiero would soon find a husband for me among his friends. I told her she was a wicked woman, over and over again, and we told her that we were sure you would forgive and even reward her if she would take us back again to you. When she was away, we thought we would try to make our escape behind, and we made a little hole in the boards. But the sand came pouring in, and we found we were underground, though how we got there we didn't know, for we had not come down any steps. So we had to give up the idea of escape." "You are partly underground," her father said, "for, as you will see when you get out, the sand has drifted up at the back of the hut to the roof, and has altogether hidden this part of the hut, so that we did not know that there was more than one room, and I should never have thought of breaking into that door had it not been for Francisco. And now, come along, my dears. Let us wait here no longer." The sailors and the servitors broke into a cheer as the girls came out of the hut. "Shall we put a torch to this place?" Francis asked Polani. "No, Francisco. It must be searched thoroughly first. Captain Lontano, do you order 4 of your men to remain here until some of the officials of the state arrive. If anyone comes before that, they must seize them and detain them as prisoners. The state will investigate the matter to the bottom." Now that they were in the open air, the merchant could see that the close confinement and anxiety had told greatly upon his daughters. Both were pale and hollow-eyed, and looked as if they had suffered a long illness. Seeing how shaken they were, he ordered one of the retainers to go to the gondola and tell the men to row it round to the nearest point to the hut. The party then walked along down to the shore. In a few minutes the gondola arrived. Polani, his 2 daughters, and Francis took their places in it. The 4 men, bound hand and foot, were laid in the bottom of the ship's boat. The gouvernante was made to take her place there also, and the sailors were told to follow closely behind the gondola, which was rowed at a very slow pace. On the way, Polani told his daughters of the manner in which Francis had discovered the place of concealment. "Had it not been for him, my dears, we should certainly not have found you, and that villain would have carried out his plans sooner or later. Would either have given his guards the slip, or, when no evidence was forthcoming against him, they would have been removed. He would then have gone outside the jurisdiction of the Republic, ordered a ship with a crew of desperadoes, and sailed round to the seaward side of San Nicolo and carried you off. Nothing could have saved you, and your resistance would, as that woman told you, have been futile." "We shall be grateful to you all our lives, Francisco," Maria said. "We shall pray for you always, night and morning. Shall we not, Julia?" "Yes, indeed," the young girl said simply. "We shall love him all our lives." "Answer for yourself, Julia," Maria said with a laugh, her spirits returning in the bright sunshine and fresh air. "When Francisco asks for my love, it will be quite soon enough to say what I think about it." "I should never have courage enough to do that, Signora. I know what you would say too well." "What should I say?" Maria asked. "You would say I was an impudent boy." Maria laughed. "I cannot think of you as a boy any longer, Francisco," she said more gravely. "I have perhaps regarded you as a boy till now, though you did save us so bravely before. But you see you are only my own age, and a girl always looks upon a boy of her own age as ever so much younger than she is herself. Besides, too, you have none of the airs of being a man, which some of my cousins have, and never pay compliments or say pretty things, but seem altogether like a younger brother. But I shall think you a boy no more. I know you better now." "But I am a boy," Francis said, "and I don't want to be thought anything else. In England we keep young longer than they do here, and a boy of my age would not think of speaking to his elders unless he was first addressed." "What are we going to do with your prisoner, Signor?" I shall take them direct to my house, and then go and report the recovery of my daughters and their capture. Officials will at once be sent, with a gondola, to take them off to the prison. There can be no question now as to the part Mocenigo has played in this business, and no doubt he will be brought here a prisoner at once. Even his nearest connections will not dare to defend conduct so outrageous, especially when public indignation has been so excited. You do not know, girls, what a stir has been caused in the city on your account. If it had not been for the citizen guard, I believe the Mocenigo palace would have been burned down, and Ruggiero's connections have scarcely dared show their faces in the streets since you have been missing. You see, every father of a family felt personally grieved, for if the nobles were permitted with impunity to carry off the daughters of citizens, who could feel safe? When this is all over, I shall take you for a time back to our home in Corfu. It is not good for girls to be the subject of public talk and attention." "I shall be very glad, father," Julia said. "I love our home at Corfu, with its gardens and flowers, far better than the palazzo here. The air is always so soft and balmy, while here it is so hot sometimes by day and so damp and foggy in the evening. I shall be glad to go back again." "And you, Maria?" "I shall be very happy there, father, but I like Venice best." "You are getting to an age to enjoy gaiety, Maria, and it is natural you should do so. However, it will not be necessary for you to be long absent. In a city like Venice there are always fresh subjects for talk, and the most exciting piece of scandal is but a 3 days' wonder. A few weeks at Corfu will restore your nerves, which cannot but have been shaken by what you have gone through. You will come back here more disposed than ever to appreciate the gaieties of Venice." "As long as it is for only a few weeks, father, I shall not care, for you know I am very fond too of our beautiful home there. Still, I do like Venice." They had now reached the steps of the Palazzo Polani. They had not proceeded by the way of the Grand Canal, as the merchant was anxious that his daughters should reach their home unrecognized, as, had they been noticed, it would have given rise to no little excitement, and they had had more than enough of this, and needed quiet and repose. Besides, until the prisoners were in the safe custody of the officials of the state, it was in every way desirable that the events of the morning should remain unknown. Their return home created quite a tumult of joy in the house. The preparations that had been made had been kept a profound secret, as the merchant could not be sure but that some other member of his household was in the pay of Mocenigo. Thus, until the girls alighted at the steps, none in the house were aware that any clue had been obtained as to their hiding place. The women ran down with cries of joy. The men would have shouted and cheered had not Polani held up his hand. "The signoras have had more than enough excitement," he said. "They are grateful to you for your goodwill and affection, but for the present they need quiet. They may have more to go through today. I pray you that no word as to their return be said outside the house. I would not that the news were whispered in the city till the Signory decide what is to be done in the matter." As soon as the girls had gone upstairs to their rooms, the ship's boat came alongside, and the prisoners were carried into the house, glances of indignation and anger being cast at the gouvernante, who had, as soon as she was placed on board the boat, closely veiled herself, and some of the women broke out into threats and imprecations. "Captain Lontano, the servants will show you a room where your men can guard the prisoners. You had better remain with them yourself. Let no one, except your own men, enter the room." Giuseppe was on the steps, and Francis stepped up to him and eagerly asked, "What news of the gondola?" "I found her stove in and full of water, behind the piles close to the steps. Someone must have pushed her there, to be out of the way of the traffic. She has several holes in her bottom, besides being stove in at the gunwale where the other boats struck her. They must have thrust the ends of their oars through her planks out of sheer spite when they found out that we had escaped them. Father and I have towed her round to your steps, but I doubt whether she is worth repairing." "Well, we can't help it, Giuseppe. She has done her work, and if every 2 ducats I lay out were to bring in as good a harvest, I should have no reason to complain." Having seen the prisoners safely placed, the merchant returned. "I think, Francisco, you must go with me. They will be sure to want to question you." "I shall have to say what were my reasons for thinking your daughters were hid in that hut, Signor," Francis said as the gondola rowed toward St. Mark's, "and I can only do that by telling of that secret meeting. I do not want to denounce a number of people besides Ruggiero. I have no evidence against them, and do not know what they were plotting, nor have I any wish to create for myself more enemies. It is quite enough to have incurred the enmity of all the connections of the house of Mocenigo." "That is true enough, Francisco, but I do not see how it is to be avoided. Unfortunately, you did recognize others besides Ruggiero." "Quite so, Signor, and I am not going to tell a lie about it, whatever the consequences may be. Still, I wish I could get out of it." "I wish you could, Francis, but I do not see any escape for it, especially as you say you did not recognize Ruggiero as the passenger you carried." "No, Signor, I did not. Might have been he, but I cannot say. He was wrapped in a cloak, and I did not see his features." "'Tis a pity, Francisco, for had you known him, the statement that, moved by curiosity, you followed him and saw him into that hut would have been sufficient without your entering into the other matter. Most of my countrymen would not hesitate about telling a lie to avoid mixing themselves up further in such a matter, for the dangers of making enemies are thoroughly appreciated here. But you are perfectly right, and I like your steady love of the truth, whatever the consequences to yourself. But certainly, as soon as the matter is concluded, it will be better for you to quit Venice for a time." "Are you going to the council direct, Signor?" "No. I am going first to the magistrates to tell them that I have in my hands 5 persons who have been engaged in carrying off my daughters, and beg them to send at once to take them into their custody. Then I shall go before the council and demand justice upon Mocenigo, against whom we have now conclusive evidence. You will not be wanted at the magistracy. My own evidence, that I found them keeping guard over my daughters, will be quite sufficient for the present, and after that the girls' evidence will be sufficient to convict them, without your name appearing in the affair at all. I will try whether I cannot keep your name from appearing before the council also. Yes, I think I might do that, and as a first step I give you my promise not to name you unless I find it absolutely necessary. You may as well remain here in the gondola until I return." It was upwards of an hour before Signor Polani came back to the boat. "I have succeeded," he said, "in keeping your name out of it. I first of all told my daughter's story, and then said that, having obtained information that Ruggiero, before he was banished from Venice, was in the habit of going sometimes at night to a hut on San Nicolo, I proceeded thither, and found my daughters concealed in the hut whose position had been described to me. Of course they inquired where I had obtained the information, but I replied that, as they knew, I had offered a large reward which would lead to my daughter's discovery, and that this reward had attracted one in the secret of Mocenigo, but that, for the man's own safety, I had been compelled to promise that I would not divulge his name. Some of the council were inclined to insist, but others pointed out that, for the ends of justice, it mattered in no way how I obtained the information. I had, at any rate, gone to the island and found my daughters there, and their evidence, if it was in accordance with what I had stated, was amply sufficient to bring the guilt of the abduction of my daughters home to Ruggiero, against whom other circumstances had already excited suspicion. A galley has already started from the mainland, with orders to bring him back a prisoner, and the girls are to appear to give evidence tomorrow. The woman, Castaldi, is to be interrogated by the council this afternoon, and I have no doubt she will make a full confession, seeing that my daughter's evidence is, in itself, sufficient to prove her guilt, and that it can be proved from other sources that it is she who inveigled them away by a false message from me. I am glad indeed, Signor, that I am not to be called, that this affair of the conspiracy is not to be brought up. I would, with your permission, now return home. Giuseppe took a message to my father from me the first thing, explaining my absence, and I told him, when we left your house, to go at once to tell him that your daughters have been recovered, and that I should return before long. Still, he will want to hear from me as to the events of the night. Will you also tell him, Francisco, that I will call upon him this afternoon? I have much to say to him." "I am glad Signor Polani is coming," Mr. Hammond said, when his son gave him the message. "I am quite resolved that you shall quit Venice at once. I do not wish to blame you for what you have done, which, indeed, is likely to have a favourable effect upon your fortunes, but that, at your age, you have mixed yourself up in the adventures of this kind, taken part in the affairs of great houses, and drawn upon yourself the enmity of one of the most powerful families of Venice, is altogether strange and improper for a lad of your years, and belonging to the family of a quiet trader. I have been thinking about it all this morning, and am quite resolved that the sooner you are out of Venice the better. If I saw any way of sending you off before nightfall, I would do so. Signor Polani has, you say, so far concealed from the council the fact that you have been mixed up in this business, but there is no saying how soon it may come out. You know that Venice swarms with spies, and these are likely, before many hours, to learn the fact of your midnight arrival at Polani's house, and as no orders were given for the preparation of this expedition to the island before that time, it will not need much penetration to conclude that you were the bearer of the news that led to this discovery of the maidens. Besides which, you accompanied the expedition, and acted as its guide to the hut. Part of this they will learn from the servants of the house. Part of it they may get out from the sailors, who, over their wine cups, are not given to reticence. The council may not have pressed Polani on this point, but, take my word for it, some of them, at least, will endeavour to get to the bottom of it, especially Monsonego's connections, who will, naturally, be alarmed at the thought that there is somewhere a traitor among their own ranks. The affair has become very serious, Francis, and far beyond the compass of a boyish scrape, and no time must be lost in getting you out of Venice. I have no doubt Polani will see the matter in the same light, for he knows the ways of his countrymen even better than I do." The interview between the two traders was a long one. At its conclusion, Francis was sent for. "Francis," his father said, "Signor Polani has had the kindness to make me offers of a most generous nature." "Not at all, Mr. Hammond," the Venetian interrupted. "Let there be no mistake upon that score. Your son has rendered me services impossible for me ever to repay adequately. He has laid me under an obligation greater than I can ever discharge. At the same time, fortunately, I am in a position to be able to further his interests in life. I have proposed, Francisco, that you shall enter my house at once. You will, of course, for some years learn the business, but you will do so in the position which a son of mine would occupy, and when you come of age you will take your place as a partner with me. Your father will return to England. He informs me that he is now longing to return to his own country, and has for some time been thinking of doing so. I have proposed to him that he shall act as my agent there. Hitherto I have not traded direct with England. In future I shall do so largely. Your father has explained to me somewhat of his transactions, and I see there is good profit to be made on trade with London, by a merchant who has the advantage of the advice and assistance of one, like your father, thoroughly conversant in the trade. Thus, I hope that the arrangement will be largely to our mutual advantage. As to yourself, you will probably be reluctant to establish yourself for life in this country, but there is no reason why, in time, when your father wishes to retire from the business, you shall not establish yourself in London, in charge of the English branch of our house." "I am most grateful to you for your offer, Signor, which is vastly beyond anything that my ambition could ever have aspired to. I can only say that I will try my best to do justice to your kindness to me." "I have no fear as to that, Francisco," the merchant said. "You have shown so much thoughtfulness in this business that I shall have no fear of entrusting even weighty affairs of business in your hands. And you must remember always that I shall still consider myself your debtor. I thoroughly agree with your father's views as to the necessity for your leaving Venice as soon as possible. In a few months this matter will have blown over. The angry feelings excited will calm down, and you will then be able to come and go in safety. But at present you are best out of town, and I have, therefore, arranged with your father that you shall embark tonight on board the Bonito, which sails tomorrow. You will have much to say to your father now, but I hope you will find time to come round and say goodbye to my daughters this evening." "Your adventures, Francis," Mr. Hammond said, when the merchant had left them, "have turned out fortunate indeed. You have an opening now beyond anything we could have hoped for. Signor Polani has expressed himself most warmly. He told me that I need not concern myself further with your future, for that would now be his affair. The arrangement that he has made with me will enable me to hold my head as high as any in the city, for it will give me almost a monopoly of the Venetian trade, and although he said that he had been long thinking of entering into trade direct with England, there is no doubt that it is his feeling towards you which has influenced him now in the matter. My business here has more than answered my expectations in one respect, but it has fallen short in another. I have bought cheaply, and the business should have been a very profitable one, but my partner in London is either not acting fairly by me, or he is mismanaging matters altogether. This offer, then, of Signor Polani is in every respect acceptable. I shall give up my own business and start anew, and selling, as I shall on commission, shall run no risk, while the profits will be far larger than I can make myself, for Polani will carry it on a great scale. As for you, you will soon learn the ways of trade, and will be able to come home and join me and eventually succeed me in the business. No fairer prospect could well open to a young man, and if you show yourself as keen in business as if you have been energetic in the pursuits you have adopted, assuredly a great future is open to you, and you may look to be one of the greatest merchants in the city of London. I know not yet what offers Polani may make you here, but I hope that you will not settle in Venice permanently, but will always remember that you are an Englishman and the son of a London citizen, and that you will never lose your love for your native land. And yet, do not hurry home for my sake. Your two brothers will soon have finished their schooling, and will, of course, be apprenticed to me as soon as I return. And if, as I hope, they turn out steady and industrious, they will, by the time they come to a man's estate, be of great assistance to me in the business. And now, you will be wanting to say goodbye to your friends. Be careful this last evening, for it is just when you are thinking most of other matters that sudden misfortune is likely to come upon you." Delighted with his good fortune, rather because it opened up a life of activity instead of the confinement to business that he had dreaded than for the pecuniary advantages it offered, Francis ran downstairs, and leaping into his father's gondola, told Beppo to take him to the Palazzo Giustiniani. On the way, he told Beppo and his son that the next day he was leaving Venice, and was going to enter the service of Signor Polani. Giuseppe ceased rowing, and throwing himself down at the bottom of the gondola, began to sob violently, with the abandonment to his emotions common to his race. Then suddenly he sat up. "If you are going, I will go too, Messer Francisco. You will want a servant who will be faithful to you. I will ask the padrone to let me go with you. You will let me go, will you not, father? I cannot leave our young master, and should pine away were I obliged to stop here to work a gondola, while he may be wanting my help, for Messer Francisco is sure to get into adventures and dangers. Has he not done it here in Venice? And is he not sure to do it at sea, where those Genoese and pirates and perils of all kinds? You shall take me with you, will you not, Messer Francisco? You will never be so hard-hearted as to go away and leave me behind?" "I shall be very glad to have you with me, Giuseppe, if your father will give you leave to go. I am quite sure that Signor Polani will make no objection. In the first place, he would do it to oblige me, and in the second, I know that it is his intention to do something to your advantage. He has spoken to me about it several times, for you had your share of the danger when we first rescued his daughters, and again when we were chased by that four-oared gondola. He has been too busy with the search for his daughters to give the matter his attention, but I know that he is conscious of his obligation to you, and that he intends to reward you largely. Therefore, I am sure that he will offer no objection to your accompanying me. What do you say, Beppo?" "I do not like to stand in the way of the lad's wishes, Messer Francisco. But you see, he is of an age now to be very useful to me. If Giuseppe leaves me, I shall have to hire another hand for the gondola, or to take a partner." "Well, we will talk it over presently," Francis said. "Here we are at the steps of the palazzo, and here comes Matteo himself. It is lucky I was not 5 minutes later, or I should have missed him." End of chapter 6.